Aha! Fear my extra sharp pencil of death. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this movie, it's part of an independent film series created by director Adam Green as a way of calling back to the old classic slasher films and recapturing that feel, while at the same time kind of parodying the genre. In case you haven't seen or heard of the first film, it centered on a group of tourists who were taking a boat tour in the bayou. While on this tour, they learned about Victor Crowley, a deformed man who was apparently killed in that area years ago as a result of a cruel prank performed by some local boys. Needless to say, he proved not to be all that dead. I like that movie as it really took its time to develop its characters, unlike some slasher films, and we definitely got to learn a little bit about the mythos of the character before the kill started, and I think that that's a good thing, so we kind of get a little setup for what we're going to be dealing with. Not to mention it had some great appearances by some horror icons, such as Robert Englund of Freddy Krueger fame, Tony Todd, who played Candyman, as well as the Mortician in some of the Final Destination films, and Kane Hodder, who played Jason Voorhees in no less than 4 of the Friday the 13th films, and he plays Victor Crowley, the killer in this film. Fancy that. Oh, and there was also an appearance by a lesser-known Joshua Leonard from the Blair Witch Project. Apart from that, it had some pretty cool kills, definitely stuff I can't say I've seen anywhere else. There was lots of over-the-top gore, and overall, it was a pretty solid callback to classic horror films, and it was just a fun concept altogether. I think I would give that one about an 8 out of 10. Very fun. And so we come to part 2. This one starts directly from where the first one left off, so the action is just going full force, no time to breathe. And yes, this is a direct sequel, so some of the characters from the first one do return. In fact, in this one, the plot is about the survivors of the first film assembling an army of gunmen and other hunters in order to seek revenge on Crowley for killing everyone in the first one. That's right, Crowley still ain't dead. Something different about this one is that whereas the first one spent a lot of time developing its main group of characters, this one spends a lot of time developing Crowley himself. In the sense that, whereas in the first one, we only got a brief glimpse into his past, in this one, we actually get a full backstory. Now, this really held my attention because I found it interesting learning about the character, and he had a pretty messed up childhood. And I also got to know more about his dad, who, interestingly enough, is also played by Kane Hodder, and I could really sympathize with what he was going through. But I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm just going to leave it at that. The problem I had with this is that all this exposition, regardless of how interesting it was, took up nearly the entire first third of the film. Therefore, outside a few of the main characters, we hardly get to know anything about the supporting cast, and therefore it seems like most of them are just there to be killed off. And what's worst is hardly any of them are likable. One character that was well developed, and I was very happy about this, was Reverend Zombie, again played by Tony Todd, because he only had a cameo in the first film, whereas in this one he's actually a main character, and he's the one who gives all the backstory on Crowley. That's pretty cool. Also, the boat that the tourists were on in the first film belonged to him, so he definitely wants that back. I just wish some of the other characters were a little more developed, and like I said, very few of them are actually likable. Although there is this one guy who is pretty funny, he's kind of played up for comic relief. Like there's this one scene where they're all meeting to discuss going into the bayou, and all he cares about are the free cookies they're handing out. You got any milk, man? Some milk for the cookies. There's another scene where he's singing this song where he's just listing different types of food, and I literally found myself laughing out loud, so, like, thumbs up for that. That was good. Also, returning from the first one, the creative deaths. Some of these were really original, and at the same time, pretty messed up. Crowley goes to work with a number of tools in this one, among them a super long chainsaw, a gas-powered belt sander, his own bare hands, and, of course, the hatchet itself. I have to say, though, for the makers of this film, subtlety is not a word that comes into their vocabulary. The majority of the deaths, despite being pretty creative, are extremely bloody, totally over the top, and not exactly what I would call tasteful. A couple of deaths are so overblown where they just lose all sense of realism. I found myself thinking, no way, that could not happen in real life. There's no way you would still be alive. And even if you would be in so much agony that there's no way you would be able to even attempt to escape, and you would just die anyway. But that's part of the fun of it, the implausibility, because they can do anything they want. Let us not forget that Crowley is basically an indestructible killing machine, and thus comes the genre parody. Please note, this is not like Scream. Whereas that was a witty satire, this is just a straight up gore fest, albeit with a pretty well developed villain and well implemented deaths. Granted, this is where we get some of the best scenes in the movie. A great climax, it's pretty cool, and there is actually a minor twist in there. So a bit of a trade-off there, not a huge deal. I just felt the first one had better pacing and more character development. Overall, I still count this as a pretty worthy sequel, and apparently it was at least a moderate success because the third film is set to come out next year. Granted, it's definitely not for everyone. I mean, it is extremely gory in some places, and it's not too long either. It's just an hour 25 minutes, and this came unrated. There is an R-rated version, but it's pretty hard to find. Suffice it to say that it does get pretty bad in some places, so kids, stay away. So I would give this one a 7.5 out of 10. Slightly below the original, but still a lot of fun. Also, make sure you watch for the director's cameo early on as a drunk guy who's throwing up on a sidewalk. How very classy. Uh-oh, I think I hear Crowley coming for me. Gotta go.